morning, everyone. My name is Daniel Casco. I am professor at the UNAE University in the Pine Major. It has been an incredible journey. This is the third and the last day of sharing with colleagues and friends from all over the world, sharing acknowledging challenges, creating opportunities, and now it's time for some reflections. Behind the event, committees and commissions were formed. Logistics, academic, technical, promotion, publicity, and research committees that were working since the event was approved and planned. I would like to thank and congratulate each of the members of these committees and commissions for the hard work during all this time. Thank for all the keynote speakers, presenters, research colleagues, friends from the different countries and from all the Ecuador. Students and others that through their investigations, best practices, teaching experience, pre-professional practices, outreach programs, and others, shared outstanding presentations and resolved questions and doubts that we as professionals have in the English teaching education. Our mission as professionals in teaching English is to share our experience. I truly and strongly believe that only sharing our teaching experiences, we can grow as a one consolidated community of English professors and teachers. As the name of the convention is, we face challenges in classes every day. We create these opportunities through congresses and events. And now it's time to reflect from the presentations that we have attended. All attendees that have legally registered their names through the Congress website, all of you have an access to the Moodle platform for the Congress, where you can find all the recording sessions by day. Each of the presenters have shared their recording sessions and some questionnaires that we have to complete. I've been receiving a lot of questions about how do you register your attendance. The way of registration of your attendance is answering all these questionnaires and completing the information through surveys that our keynote speakers and our presenter have shared. Remember that you don't have to answer all the questionnaires, but at least 60% of them to complete and fulfill and justify the 40 hours that your certificate will have and you will receive. Technology has played an important role and has made possible for us to share these 3 outstanding days. Thanks to all of you, and remember that we can open doors and be close and share always ideas to create a knowledgeable English community in Ecuador and around the world. Last but not least, I would like to mention that if you have any further questions about the conference and the use of the platform, we will be more than happy and willing to help you all the time and answer all your questions. It is time for Stephanie to introduce the keynote speaker for today. Thank you so much.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our last keynote speaker of Challenges, Opportunities, and Reflections on ELT. My name is Stefan Neguisaka. I am a student of the 6th semester of the English language teaching major in UNAE. I am responsible for hosting this presentation today, and I am glad to welcome Magister Janine Matts. She holds a master's degree on Hispanic Applied Linguistics from Illinois University in Chicago. She has studied in different countries like France and Spain, and she has worked as a professor in different universities of Ecuador, like Pontificia Universidad Católica del Ecuador, Universidad Central del Ecuador, and Universidad de las Américas. She has worked for different institutions like Municipality of Quito, UNESCO, and also as an editor-in-chief and author of the third BGU English textbook series of the Ministry of Education. In addition, she is the author of several publications like the one Experience English, English Pedagogical Modules for Third BGU in the Ecuadorian Public School System of the Ministry of Education. and she has attended to different congress and conferences as a keynote speaker with topics like the effect of effective filter and also from traditional teaching to communicative ways. In addition, she speaks 5 languages: English, Spanish, French, Catalan, and Quechua. Today, she is presenting the topic From Traditional to Communicative, the why behind it all. Welcome everyone, and let's start with the presentation.
Thank you very much for that kind welcome. Thank you very much for your invitation. Thank you to the UNAE for contacting me and inviting me to this very important conference this morning. I'm very happy to be here and share with you a topic that I am very passionate about, which is from traditional to communicative, the why behind it all. So we're going to take a look at how we're starting to change in the Ecuadorian public school system our ways of teaching English to make it more conducive to language acquisition. We're going to take a look at the why behind all of this, and we're also going to see how that relates to the new texts in the English classes in the public school system of Ecuador. So, in order to start today, let's see, why are we talking about this topic specifically? I'm sure a lot of you have seen this very sad graphic for here we have the EPI score. This is an international ranking of English proficiency. It is a very well-respected ranking, and we can see where our lovely country of Ecuador is in number 93 out of 100 countries. We are last in Latin America, 19 out of 19 countries as far as English proficiency. Our score is very low, and so when we look at this figure, okay, let's improve it. How can we improve it? How? So we, of course, can talk about a lot of different problems that we have in English teaching, right? There's a lack of funding, et cetera, et cetera. But one of the major problems that we see is the methodologies that are used around the country, okay? So this is something we can actually control as teachers. This is something that we can make a change with. So first we have to understand, what does traditional mean exactly? Well, the word traditional in a general sense, according to Merriam-Webster, is following or conforming to tradition, adhering to past practices or established conventions, right? So this is what traditional means in a general sense. What does it mean when we talk about language teaching? Well, we can look at some traditional methods, right? For example, grammar translation method. This was a method that was popular in the 1800s, talking about 200 years ago, right? And it was based on translation, translating from the L1, the first language, to the L2, the second language, and vice versa, and focusing on grammar structures and translation, right? Then we can talk about a traditional method like the audiolingual method, right? This was popular in the 1950s and 60s. It was based on repetition and drills when people believed that learning a language was like forming a habit. And so what we needed to do was repeat and repeat and repeat like parrots to be able to form the habit of language. Not quite correct, right? Traditional then, in the language learning sense, means explicit grammar instruction is the focus, right? Meaning I'm going to give you a lot of formulas like in math, right? A lot of paradigms, a lot of structures, this is how it works, and this is what you have to learn. It's like teaching English like math. We know teachers say, okay, here's the Pythagorean theorem, a squared plus b squared equals c squared. Now, take the values of A and B, put them into the formula, and then you get C, right? But that's not how we have language stored in our brains, okay? So we can see an example at the bottom of green of how we would teach using like a traditional way. Right, so we say, okay, since today, the present continuous, we're going to talk about the present continuous. It talks about things that are happening now. We use the verb to be plus a verb in ing form, right? So we have I am, you are, he, she, it is, we are, they are, plus the ing form of the verb, studying, sleeping, eating. If I want the negative, I'm going to say, I am not reading. If I want a question, I'm going to say, are you walking? Now practice. right? This is how a lot of classes in English are being taught. This is how we've taught for decades, right? Using this type of formula and then making our students produce 5 minutes after they've just seen the structure for the first time, okay? Now, let's shift our focus a moment and let's think as native speakers, okay? So let's imagine for a moment that I'm gonna take you to a trip to Chicago, my hometown, okay? This is where I'm from, where I lived more than 30 years of my life, my city. Okay, so here we have Chicago in pandemic times with people with masks on. Yeah, and let's imagine that we go up to somebody in Chicago on State Street. This is State Street. This is a very popular, busy street. It's Chicago Theater in the background. Okay, so we go up to a Chicagoan, a native Chicagoan, and we ask them this question. Excuse me, sir, ma'am. Can you please conjugate the verb to study in the present perfect continuous third person plural? Do you think a native Chicagoan, if they're not a linguist, is going to be able to do this? Probably not, right? In the same regard, let's look at a native Spanish speaker. Okay, let's take this city right here. Some of you might recognize this city, this beautiful city, which I now call home. This is Quito, Ecuador, right? This is the Naciones Unidas. And we ask somebody who's walking along on the Naciones Unidas and say, perdón, ¿usted puede conjugar, por favor, el verbo estudiar en el pluscuamperfecto del modo subjuntivo tercera persona plural? Do you think that your average Quiteño will say, oh yeah, sure? I don't know if you might know what it is. If you think you know what it is, go ahead and share with us in the chat. Let's see if you can get it. Those of you who study languages and linguistics could probably do this. But the average speaker of Spanish in Quito, the average Quiteño, could probably not do this. They'll probably look at you with this kind of face, like, Monday? Excuse me, what? Just like in Chicago, if we ask them the same thing. Why is this the case? Why can't native speakers do something like this? Because this is not how language is organized in our brains. So asking a native speaker to do something so unnatural with their language is difficult. So let's take a look at what some traditional activities might look like. Okay, these are the types of activities that we need to start to leave behind, throw in the garbage or in the recycling bin, right? Okay. These activities are based on repetition, which leads to habit formation. So we're talking about like mechanical exercises where we don't really need to think about what we're doing, but just fill in blanks and just like a machine, kind of like this image right here. You all know Charlie Chaplin, I'm guessing. Where is he? In a factory. What's he doing? The same thing over and over. Do you think that he's really thinking about what he's doing? Probably not, right? So, for example, we have this type of activity. Complete the missing verbs in the chart. So we have the present, the simple past, and the past participle, yeah? And then we have some verbs, and we need to fill in the spaces on the chart that are missing. As a native English speaker, the first time that I actually taught English was here in Ecuador, because I had always taught Spanish in Chicago. So I can tell you all of the rules about when we have to use the subjunctive and the subordinate clause and all these other things, right? But in my own language, I didn't know any rules. I mean, I knew them, but implicitly. I knew how to apply them. I didn't know what the rules were exactly. So when you ask me to do this chart, I have to put the language in a context. I have to say, okay, simple past is like if I'm talking about yesterday, what I did. So I have to say yesterday here. Okay, yesterday I heard somebody talk, heard. I couldn't do this just by saying, okay, past participle. I don't have that information readily available as a native speaker, right? Because language is not organized that way in my brain, in anyone's brain. Okay, here's another example. Conjugate the verbs in the present perfect, right? This is a very typical example that we see in worksheets, in textbooks, all over, right? All over. So what do we have to do in this activity? Okay, present perfect is has or have plus the past participle, correct? Okay, so all I have to do is look at the subject and look at the verb in parentheses. Choose the correct auxiliary of the verb have for the subject and choose the correct participle. Now, do I need to understand what these sentences say at all? Do I need to process the meaning of the English in these sentences? Not at all. In fact, I could cover up the rest of the sentence here. I can cover this and I can say, okay, I have traveled, Jenny has eaten, we have worked, they have gone, done. And I can get a 10 out of 10 and understand absolutely nothing of what the language says. You see? So these types of activities are not good. Let's take a look at how my Spanish classes were in the United States. I'm talking about way back in the 1990s, maybe the beginning of the 2000s. So that gives you an idea of how old I am. I'm dating myself. Okay, so my Spanish classes in the United States look something like this, right? We have the verb in the infinitive form, hablar, right? To speak or to talk. Then we had to identify it as AR, ER, or IR verb. We had to take off the ending, the AR form, and then put the endings for each of the subjects. So you can see this chart here. I had to work in paradigms a lot. These are paradigms, right? These fixed structures. And I had notebooks full of these verbs, full of them, right? Pages upon pages of these verb charts, okay? And then I had to complete activities similar to the ones that we saw in English on the previous slide. So the same thing happens. If I have to conjugate these verbs in the simple present in Spanish, right? All I have to do is look at the subject here, which I have up here, and then I take the AR ending off, and I add AN. Ellos hablan, tú estudias, yo tomo, ella baila, vosotros viajáis, tan. Did I understand anything of the language? No, I don't need to know what tomar, estudiar, hablar, bailar, viajar. I don't need to know what any of that means in order for me to complete this activity. There is the fundamental problem. If we're not processing the meaning of the language that we're working with, what are we doing? How do we expect to have, as a result, students who can use the language to communicate real ideas if what we ask them to do is mechanical and does not require them to process the meaning? Okay. What's so bad then about traditional language teaching? We can see the poor brain who's so frustrated with this because we're not working with him. We're working against him. Right? These activities are mechanical and do not force students to process meaning. This process is very important. It's called binding, right? This is a notion that came about from Tracy Terrell, and it includes form and meaning. So that's to say, when we go through the psycholinguistic process of binding, we connect a form, so let's say present continuous, to be plus ing, right? With a meaning. And this is the part that we're leaving aside a lot of the time. We're not connecting the meaning. We're not obligating our students to constantly process the meaning of what they're doing in English. They have to be able to process the meaning, right? To be thinking about, okay, what am I actually saying? What am I expressing in English, right? And besides, what are these random sentences? They don't mean anything to anybody. Who is ellos? Who is Susan? Who is they? Who are these people that we see in these activities, just in random sentences? We have no context to give us an orientation, right? Okay, plus, like I mentioned, they force our brains to work in a way that is not natural for dealing with language. Therefore, they are not conducive to acquisition. I can give you a little anecdote about this. I had a friend visit me a few years ago from Chicago. We've been friends our whole lives since we were little kids, right? Guaguitos. And he came with his wife a few years ago to visit Ecuador. And he is college educated and has studied Spanish for as many years as I did in school. So we started studying at the same age, 12 years old, right? And he studied all through high school and all through university. And he said to me, I studied 10 years of Spanish, 10 years. Why can I not communicate with Ecuadorians? Why can I not communicate with Ecuadorians? Why can't I can understand some of it, he says, but I can't have a conversation. And I said, it's because of the way that we traditionally have learned Spanish, right? In this mechanical way, it doesn't allow us to be able to produce real language. Because as we know, there's a difference between learning and acquisition, right? And learning is a situation that produces knowledge, right? So all of these traditional classes, what they produce is knowledge about language. So when you come out of those classes, you can say, I know what the past perfect is in English. It's formed by this. It's conjugated this way. I know how to construct this third conditional. We need to use in the if clause this and that. But can you use all of those tools to be able to communicate? Acquisition, on the other hand, produces an ability. So in the end, you're able to use the language in real communicative situations. So this is probably why you have some friends or colleagues of yours that when they find out you're an English teacher, they say, chuta, yo estudié 10 años de inglés y no puedo más que el verbo to be, right? Or something like that. Yeah, why is that? It's probably due to the methodologies that have been used in the classroom, right, for a long time. And we know that these methodologies do not work. How do we know this? Because we have more than 40 years of linguistic studies since the pioneer days of this field of language acquisition in the 1980s with Dr. Stephen Krashen. Up until today, there have been dozens and dozens of studies that all say the same thing, actually, that say that the traditional ways of teaching are not conducive to language acquisition, that we actually do not acquire a language when we teach it this way. We're not able to use the language, right? So then we have to ask ourselves, why are we not paying attention to these findings? Why? If we find out things about, for example, the coronavirus, if there are studies done that say wearing a mask will greatly reduce the risk of transmission of the coronavirus, what do people do? Wear a mask, right? Most people who pay attention to science and the news, they wear a mask, okay? They say washing your hands will reduce the risk of transmission. We wash our hands, we use alcohol on our hands. Why aren't we paying attention to the scientific findings in linguistics and applying them to the classroom? There could be a lot of reasons for this, simply that people are not aware of these findings, for example, or because people have a hard time changing their practices. Change is difficult, right? But change in this field is absolutely necessary. Okay, so then what's the alternative? What should we be doing, right? Well, in order to determine that, we can ask ourselves this question: how did we acquire our first language? And the answer to this question is through input. Input, input, and more input. Think about how you speak to little kids in their native language. How do we speak to little children? We don't say, for example, in Spanish, a ver, Juanito, vamos a sentarnos a conjugar el verbo hablar. Ya, es un verbo AR. No, we don't speak to them that way, right? We speak to them in a different way. We speak to them in a way that's communicative, where we share messages with them, but in simplified language, right? Why can't we teach a second language in the similar way that we teach the first language to little children? If our brains are designed to acquire language in that way, why aren't we teaching a second language in that way? Yeah? Our brains are designed to acquire languages naturally by being exposed to them, right? We have something in our brains called universal grammar. Thank you, Noam Chomsky, for this notion, right? Universal grammar, which is a blueprint that allows us to acquire any language in the world as long as we are exposed to comprehensible input in that language. So why aren't we teaching in this way, right? As I mentioned, we talk to children using simplified language in context, okay? Children spend months, even years, taking statistics on their input without speaking. Yet we ask students in our classes, our English classes, to produce a target structure 10 minutes after they first see it. You see how we have a problem here, right? that children go through a silent period in language acquisition where they're simply taking in all of the language that surrounds them, yet we don't allow our students to go through a silent period. We don't allow them to simply receive English, meaningful language, not formulas and paradigms, right? But meaningful language. We don't allow them to do that. We say, okay, here's the formula, produce it yourself, write 5 sentences using it. How, if they haven't been able to incorporate it in their developing system, their developing linguistic system, right? So, okay, this brings us to a recent notion from Dr. Stephen Krashen called optimal input. If you guys are not familiar with Dr. Stephen Krashen's work, I really highly recommend that you check out his website and you check out all the tons of busy videos that are on YouTube where he talks about his hypotheses and his way of viewing language acquisition. I agree 110% with what he says, so I'm a big fan. And recently he's modified his input hypothesis to come up with this notion of optimal input. So instead of all of these grammar activities and these types of mechanical exercises that we know do not help with language acquisition, what we want to do is start moving towards optimal input. And what exactly is optimal input? Krashen describes 4 characteristics that optimal input has, okay? And these 4 characteristics are listed right here. Optimal input is comprehensible. It can be understood by the student. Not every single word, right? Not every word, but the majority of it can be understood by the student. If you guys check, there's a video actually on YouTube. If you guys type in, for example, in the search Krashen Buse, he gave us a talk at the Buse in Ecuador this past January, online, of course, where he talks about comprehensible input, and he gives 2 examples. He gives a German lesson, right? And he gives the lesson first just speaking normally, just normal German like he would speak to a native German speaker, okay? And then he gives another lesson, mini lesson, just a minute or 2, where he speaks in a way that is comprehensible even for people who have never studied German. It's amazing. You guys can watch it and you can observe the difference, right? So we want to speak to our students in a language that is understood by them. What does that mean? Not using very complex sentences, vocabulary that is more common and not obscure vocabulary, using certain techniques to simplify our language, right? Compelling, that's the second characteristic that Krashen mentions. Compelling means that it has to be extremely interesting for students. And what is extremely interesting for students? You have to know your students, right? So for example, if you teach bachillerato, what do the students like in bachillerato? What are they interested in? If you give them a reading about the Mojave Desert, students in bachillerato probably aren't going to care very much, right? Let's be honest. But if you give them a reading about the history of Instagram, for example, or about Snapchat filters, or about a biography about the latest YouTuber, suddenly you have their attention, right? So we have to find input that is interesting for our students, and for that we need to know our students. We can't just give them any English. Here, watch a documentary from BBC. First of all, the level is probably too difficult. And second, are they even interested in the topic? If they're not interested in the topic, the input is not going to be internalized as well. It's not going to become intake, which is the language that actually stays in their brains and becomes part of working memory, right? So we need to find things in English that are super interesting. In fact, when people ask me, like, how do I improve my English? What web page can I look at for, for grammar? What web page is good for exercises and stuff? I always say no, none of that stuff. What you need to do is live in English, but you need to do things that are already interesting to you, right? So if you like cooking, for example, you love to cook, right? Watch a cooking show on YouTube in English, or read a recipe in English. If you like to watch the series Friends, watch it in original version, right? If you like to read blogs about a certain topic, read them, but in English. Live in English, because this way you're receiving meaningful language and your brain knows what to do with it. It might seem crazy, but as you're cooking or cleaning or watching the kids or doing whatever you're doing at home, put something on in English in the background. And even if you're not paying attention 100%, your brain is working on it. So as long as you find interesting things in English, we can be more successful as far as acquisition. The third characteristic, rich. Rich, what do we mean by rich? Rich in language, right? Rich in content also, right? So we need to include a little bit of new language, something that is not part of the student's developing system already. Krashen calls this I+1. I represents everything that the student already has in their implicit system in their brains in English, right? So if they've already studied the simple present, the simple past, the present continuous, the past continuous, fine, they already have all of that in their working memory in English. Now we can add, for example, the present perfect. One new thing, if we overwhelm students with a lot of new vocabulary and a lot of new grammar forms, then it's going to be too much for their brain. We need to filter the input and make sure they're able to process it. And the last characteristic, abundant. Abundant. Abundant means a lot of it, a lot, tons and tons of input. So when you're thinking, what should I send my students for homework this week? Input. Send them input. Tell them, look at this, for example, find something on this particular web page that's actually textualized English and read it, or do something that you would tell me what you like to do. Okay, now let's find something we can do in English with that you already like to do, right? But lots and lots of it. If I have 5 days to teach a target structure, let's say that I have 5 days to teach my students the present perfect, right? Of those 5 days and 5 hours that I have during the week, I would make 3 or 4 of them input. Them receiving the structure, responding to it, processing the meaning, internalizing it, and maybe the 5th day, I would work on them producing it. It's totally a complete shift, right, from what we're used to. But what is the result? What is the result of these 4 characteristics? The result, according to Dr. Krashen, is subconscious language acquisition. So we acquire language without even really being aware of it. And that's the cool thing, right? Okay. So what about grammar? This is a question that I get a lot. As the editor-in-chief of the modules project for the Ministry of Education, I've had a lot of teachers ask me, what about grammar? Where are the grammar pages in the book? Where the grammar pages in the book, and we'll take a look at those in a moment, are all over the book, right? Here's my response to this. If you give good input, centering it around a target structure, and you also help the students through processing their input by directing their attention to the target structure, poof, magic. They will be able to tell you how the language works. This is a complete shift in the way that we have been teaching. Instead of the teacher giving all the rules and telling the student to practice it, now the teacher gives the meaningful input and the students have to see how it works. It's kind of like a guessing game. They have to figure out how the rule works, which is fun for them, and it also empowers them. And you'll see what I mean in a moment. So this is all, but how do we create these types of activities? Let's take a look. Okay, here's an example. Let's say that your target structure is the regular simple past, right? Just ED, okay? I think most of you recognize this family. This family has been around for decades now. I remember watching them when I was younger. The Simpsons family, right? So this is a context that a lot of people already are familiar with. So there's a good start, right? They know the Simpsons family. So let's take a look here. If we just look at this paragraph without starting to read it yet, we can see right away there are forms that are in bold print, right? We want to make sure that those forms are highlighted in the context so that the students pay more attention to that. They will say, there's something important here. My teacher put it in a different color, or my teacher underlined it, or my teacher did something. I have to pay attention to this, okay? So if I'm teaching, I can tell them, okay, students, today we're going to talk about the Simpsons family. You all know the Simpsons family? I can say, who are some members of the Simpsons family? What are their names? Bart, and they can answer me, right? To start contextualizing everything. I can say, okay, who is your favorite character? Bart, Marge, Lisa, Maggie, Homer, Moe, what is it, Milhouse, right? Why do you like Bart? I can start contextualizing the language, right? And so they're into the topic. And then that's when I present to them the actual target grammar structure, which is right here. So if I read this paragraph out loud to my students, I would read it in this way. The Simpsons family was very busy last summer. Homer walked to Moe's bar every day and talked to his friends. Marge cleaned the house and cooked all of the meals. Lisa practiced the saxophone every day, and her parents listened to her. Bart played a lot of sports and studied with Milhouse. Maggie learned how to say her first word. The family traveled together from Springfield to New York by car. They really enjoyed their summer. Okay, what did you notice in my voice? What did you notice as I was reading that out loud? Did you notice that the bold words I was emphasizing with my voice? Because I'm showing my students, look, I want you to pay attention to this, to these words. Are you listening? They hear it. They also see it, right? They need to see it and hear it. And then when I'm finished, I can take away the paragraph and I can say, for example, okay, students, tell me, is this true or false? And I could say, Bart played a lot of music. Bart played a lot of music. Is that true or false? So the students, in order to answer that question, what do they have to do? They have to process the meaning. They had to process the meaning of what we saw in the paragraph, and then they have to process the meaning again in order to answer true or false, right? So they absolutely need to understand the English in this paragraph and in the questions after, in order to be successful in the activity. They are working with the target structure to answer, right? They're saying true, false. They can say yes, no. They can say agree, disagree. I can give them different options. Bart played a lot of, and I could say sports, music, etc. But what I can't do yet is make them produce the target structure, because they have nothing in their implicit system from which to produce a meaningful utterance with that structure. First, we have to put lots of meaningful language into their implicit system. Then, from that, the students can take language and produce meaningful utterances with the target structure, right? And also notice that this paragraph, the text here, is at the level of the students. If the students are just starting to acquire the regular simple past, this is at their level. They can handle this. They can process this, right? There are no complex sentences. There aren't very difficult words. They know most of the vocabulary, if not all of the vocabulary. So they can focus their efforts on processing the target structure, which is what we want to teach them, right? Okay, let's take a look at another example. More fun with input. Okay. So this is another way to be able to present them with input, but in a context, right? As you can see in these instructions, it says, read these sentences about your teacher and decide if they are true or false about what she did last weekend. Then check with your teacher and see if you are correct. Students love these types of activities, right? Anytime we talk about our personal lives, they're like, ooh, suddenly they're very interested. Okay, so if I put these sentences here, again, we can observe the same thing, right? So we see the target structure, simple past, in context, okay? We see each one of the verbs clearly highlighted in bold print, okay? Then we have the students, they have to respond to it somehow. And making them respond makes us sure that they are actually processing the input, okay? It makes us, we know for a fact that they're processing it. So we can do this as a class, we can ask them to work on it individually, and then we can discuss it. They can discuss it in small groups. They can do it any way that you see fit for your class. But again, we can notice the students have to process meaning, right? We're focusing on one target structure. The language that we're using is not too complex for the level of the students. They can understand these sentences, simple sentences, right? Contextualized within the context of the life of my teacher. And students have fun with this. So then you can, afterwards, you can go over it together and you can say, okay, how many of you, raise your hands in Zoom or whatever you use, right? How many of you say number one is true? My teacher cooked breakfast, lunch, and dinner last weekend. How many of you say that's true? Yes, my teacher cooked breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Okay, how many say it's false? And then I can tell them, oh, that's false. No way. In my case, no. Yeah, and I can go through each one of those in the same fashion, right? Or I can ask a student. I can say, for example, Juanito, for number two, she and her son played soccer together. What do you think, true or false? She and her son played soccer together. So you see that I'm repeating things, but it's much more contextualized. And I'm putting all of the structures in an actual sentence with meaning. And this is the way that we're going to help our students to be able to use the English language, right? So this is just another example. You have a lot of options of what you can do. These are called binary option activities because students have two options to choose from, true or false, right? Yes, no, agree, disagree, Quito, Guayaquil. They can have two different options to choose from. We also have a lot of other options for input activities. If you're interested in this, I can recommend some literature to you. We can include my email somewhere if you'd like to get more information about how to create these activities. There's actually a book that is really excellent, James Lee and Bill Van Patten, that is called Making Communicative Language Teaching Happen. That's the title of the book. It's an excellent book because it combines theory with practice. It tells you this is what we know about language acquisition, and this is how we need to apply it in the classroom. So if you're interested in that, there's that book available that is totally worth the investment. It's an outstanding book. But anyway, you have a lot of other options. So you can do like matching, you can have two columns where they have to match things. You can do selecting alternatives, which is like a multiple choice type thing. Ojo, multiple choice, not where they choose the correct verb form because they don't know that yet. They're just learning the structure, right? So it would have to be multiple choice, like give them different options. For example, if I'm teaching second conditional, if you won the lottery, or if I won the lottery, I would, and then I can have the different options. Like they can choose which option they would do, right? Something like that. There could be surveys where they respond with a Likert scale, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, agree, disagree type things, right? We can do a lot of different types of activities, ordering and ranking, put these events in order in which they happened or in which they will happen, or things like that, okay? But the point is that with this input, they're receiving contextualized language that is meaningful, that is put in a context. They're internalizing the form without the paradigm and this formula and everything, but in their real language. And they need tons of this in order for them to then consequently produce output in the language, right? Which is what we can see here. After plenty of input, but I mean tons of input first, right? Then and only then can we ask for output. And if we were to talk to Dr. Stephen Krashen right now, and we would say, what do you think about this, about producing output? Dr. Krashen would tell us, y me consta, because he actually said this, right? That there's no role for output in acquisition, that we can acquire a language without producing it. We can just receive abundant quantities of it, right? Yeah, in the classroom, that's not normally what we do, obviously, right? So we do ask output, we do ask students to produce things with the target structure, but we ask for it way too early. We have to wait. We have to fill them with input first, okay? And when we ask for output, we don't mean those sentences where we fill in the blanks and the student's like not even looking at the rest of the sentence. We don't mean that kind of output. We mean output that's communicative, that communicates an idea, right? So students can now attempt to produce output in a communicative way through tasks with steps. In output, we need to include a communicative goal and a linguistic goal. So our communicative goal can be something like, what can I do with this? So let's say that I want to work on imperatives with my students. That's my linguistic goal. My linguistic goal is what part of the English language, in our case, do we want to teach the students? Imperatives. Okay, fine. What can I do with imperatives in real life? That is the communicative goal. So, for example, we can teach a recipe, right? Or we can give directions to a place, right? These are communicative goals. What can I communicate by using imperatives, which is my linguistic goal, okay? Yeah, they're centered on real-life communicative events. So let's imagine you're in this situation. Let's say you're going to do this. Okay, now think of, not just random 10 sentences, fill in the blanks, okay? In these types of activities, if we're teaching using a communicative approach, communication is the focus, just like the name says, right? It's not always about accuracy because let's face it, right? I've spoken to a lot of non-native English speakers in Ecuador and in other parts of the world, and their English is not always perfect, but that's fine. Because we can have a communication. They can communicate their ideas to me. I remember someone once told me, when they asked me, where are you from? And I said, Chicago. And they, I love Chicago. The people is so nice. The people is so nice, right? Is so nice. Okay, in English, obviously, we say the people are nice because it's plural. But I understood the idea perfectly. There was no problem in communication. Right? And what is the ultimate goal of language? Why do we use language? I think it's to communicate ideas. Can we communicate ideas if we say a word wrong? If we conjugate a verb wrong? Usually, yes, we can still communicate ideas. Now, this doesn't mean like total anarchy in the classroom and do whatever you want and no rules matter and we don't need rules. Not like that. But the accuracy comes after time. This happens with native speakers too, if you think about it, right? How do native speakers develop in their language? So native speakers start speaking in short phrases, right? One word, two word, then the two word phase, then et cetera, right? And they progress. And little kids are allowed to make mistakes or errors in language. We accept that from children, but we don't accept that from second language learners, which is unfortunate because they are going through a process of acquisition as well. And so we should also be able to accept those errors. Maybe the focus doesn't need to be on the perfect verb conjugation, but the focus needs to be on, did you communicate your ideas? You did? Then that's good. Yes, we could work on our verb conjugation. Don't forget the third person singular S in the simple present, for example. But did you know that actually the third person S in the simple present is one of those morphemes that is acquired very late in native speakers of English, very late. I have a son who just turned 5 years old, and he started using the third person singular S for the present tense right when he turned 4 years old. 4 years old, and he was exposed to it since before he was born. He was exposed to English. It took him that long to start using the third person singular S. It took him a long time. When do we teach that form in our classrooms? That's like one of the first grammar structures that students learn is the simple present. So right there, we're not going along with the natural process of acquisition of the English language in this case, right? Because the first form that native speakers usually acquire in English is actually the present continuous. Yet we don't teach that first in our classrooms, right? So we need to shift the focus to communication and not as much accuracy. Later, after the years, later students will start fixing their problems. In fact, let's think about situations of native speakers, right? So when a native speaker, a little child, says something incorrect in their language, a lot of times parents or other adults will correct them, right? So let's take an example from Spanish. So in Spanish, for example, little children always conjugate the irregular preterite verbs incorrectly. So they go through this phase, right? So for example, in Spanish, you have the verb ponerse, right? That in the preterite, in the past tense, you would say me puse tal cosa, right? So let's say a little child, a little quiteño says, mira papi, me poní la chompa. Yeah, and then the father says, a ver, mijito, no se dice me poní, se dice me puse, a ver, diga. And the child says, me puse. And then a couple hours later, what happens? The child comes up to their parents and says, mira papi, me poní los zapatos. And again, the child says the same thing, incorrectly, right? Because we found that overt correction like that does not work. The child will correct it at that moment, but then later that does not stick with them. And we start to find the same things in second language acquisition too. So how do they end up correcting all of their errors? How does the child who always said me poní, finally say me puse through his input? He realizes, uh-oh, something that I'm saying does not match with what people are saying to me. So I have to fix it. And once the child fixes it, he doesn't say it wrong again. He fixed it himself, but when he was ready. You see? So our job as language teachers should be to provide our students with a lot of input, a lot of good input. And that's why it's so important that as language teachers, your English is good too, because you are the main source of input for your students. If your English level is not where it should be, then it's difficult for your students because then they receive input that isn't always correct, right? So it's a constant challenge also for English teachers to always continuously improve their own English. And how do you improve your own English? You all can say it together through input, right? Through more input. Okay. Coming towards the end of the presentation, I'd like to speak a little bit about the project of the English modules for the Ministerio de Educación del Ecuador that we worked on. These modules are available at the link that I've posted here. It's https://recursos2.educacion.gov.es/inicio, okay? When you go to this website, we'll take a look at it in a moment together, okay? I just want to explain a little bit about them before we look at them. Okay, so this was the project that we undertook from May 2019 through October 2020. This project was financed by the Ministerio de Educación del Ecuador and also by the US Embassy. All of the project that was completed in the year 2020 was financed by the US Embassy. We as a team of the modules are very grateful to the US Embassy for stepping in and helping to finish this project, because I don't know if it would have been finished without them. So we're very thankful to the US Embassy for their collaboration. These modules are now public domain, which means that anybody can use these modules as their material in their English classes. Public domain, that is the policy of the US Embassy when they help finance educational material, is to make it public domain. So this is awesome news for you guys, because that means any of you in the public sector or the private sector can make use of these modules if you like them. Okay. Those who are outside of Ecuador, unfortunately, because of the way that the webpage of the Ministry of Education of Ecuador is established, it's difficult to access them outside of Ecuador, but I'm trying to see if we can find a way to fix that and allow them to be accessed around the world. Even though a lot of the modules are contextualized in Ecuador, there are some pages that are specifically relevant to Ecuador, but anyway. So we have a total of 72 modules. That means 6 modules per grade, and this is for grades segundo de básica through tercero de bachillerato, right? Okay, by tercero de bachillerato, the goal of these modules is that the students should reach, in theory, if everything goes right, in theory, they should reach a B1.2 level in the Common European Framework. That means if they continue to university, those students should be able to take courses at the B2 level in university. We use two approaches in these modules. We use a communicative approach, and we also use CLIL, content and language integrated learning. The communicative approach we've talked about a little bit already in this presentation, based on communication through structured input, et cetera, et cetera. But CLIL is basically where we unite different subject areas with the English language. So students are learning about different things, about math, science, social studies, history, art, etc., through English. They're using English as a tool to learn about other subjects. Okay, that's what CLIL is. These are based on the Ecuadorian English curriculum, which is available on the ministry's webpage. If you look under Lengua Extranjera, you'll find the English curriculum of Ecuador that was published in 2016. This is an outstanding document. It is a very, very, very well-written document that has basically a lot of the things that I've just explained in this presentation in it. It is the basis for the curriculum of English. So we have this foundation that is very good for what we need to do as English teachers. It's just that we need to pay attention to this foundation, right? Okay. We've also developed a Facebook page, just so that you're aware. There's a Facebook page called Ecuadorian Public School English Teachers. It's specifically the purpose, when it was created in April of 2020, the purpose of this Facebook page was, and still is, to help teachers in their teaching practices, to help transition to these new texts, because these are very new for a lot of teachers. These use methodologies and approaches that a lot of teachers haven't been exposed to before. And so it's really important to have a support system. And as we know, as English teachers, we are a special breed, right? We're quite different from math teachers, science teachers, social studies teachers, philosophy, etc., because we're working with a process of acquisition. The rest of the teachers are working with knowledge. So we needed a special place to be able to support each other. So with another author of the modules, from the author of Primero de Bachillerato and myself, we created this Facebook page, and we provide support as a volunteer project, basically, to the English teachers of Ecuador in the public school system. If you are an English teacher in the public school system, please, I invite you to join this page. Anyone can, if you'd like to see what we're doing in the public school system, but especially the public school English teachers, because you have a lot of resources on that page, a lot of videos, a lot of interesting things that will help you in your using of the new material, that will support you, that will show you how to use them. In fact, we're working also on outreach projects with the university in the United States, Gonzaga University. We're starting to establish outreach programs with my university here in Ecuador, and we're trying to provide even more support to the public school English teachers to work with this new material. So that's up and coming. So please join the Facebook page if you are a public school English teacher. I think you will find lots of important information there. Okay, so let's take a look for a moment then at just the modules, just por encima, as we say, right? I just want to show you, oops, let's go right here. Here we go. Okay, so here we have this page. This web page is what I had shown you on the slide. This is the address right here, okay? So you can see where you go. Yeah, and when you go to this page, what you get is this right here that says Recursos Educativos. So how do I get to the modules? Well, it depends on what level you teach. So preparatoria, there's nothing, because we started from segundo de básica. So this is elemental, right? If you teach elemental, you go here. Media, you go here. Superior, you go here. And bachillerato, you go here, okay? And then if you, let's go to bachillerato. I'm most familiar with bachillerato, and especially tercero de bachillerato, because that is the one that I wrote, so I can easily show you how this works. If we go to recursos educativos, right here, and módulos, and we click there. This is the same for every subnivel, so recursos educativos, módulos, etc. So I go here, bachillerato, recursos educativos, módulos. I click there, right? When I click there, this takes me to this page where I can see módulos bachillerato, and I have primero, segundo, and tercero, okay? So I'm going to go to tercero, which in the US system would be seniors in high school. For those of you who might be seeing with the US context, it's the last year of school before university for students who go to university, okay? So if I click here, Módulos Inglés, right here, I can see all the modules. Now, there are audios that accompany these modules that should be on the platform very soon. They're being edited in the Ministry of Education, and they should be on the platform in the next week or two. That's what I was told. So hopefully they will come. But every module should have a little link here that says Descargar Audios. So you'll have the audios for each one of them. But for now, let's take a look at Pedagogical Module 2 of Tercero de Bachillerato. So when I click on this, this is what I see. When it comes up, it loads in PDF format, and then we have this, okay? So we look at this. I'll make this a little bigger for us. So what you can see here, so that you know how this works, we have some curricular threads, okay, over here. These are the same in every module. In Bachillerato, every module is 32 pages, okay? In Superior and Bachillerato, 32 pages. In Elemental and Media, they're 24 pages each, okay? So in these 32 pages, we can see curricular threads. These come from the Ministry of Education and the curriculum, okay? We have kind of like a question here to be thinking about in the module. And then we also have the title in the middle of the triangle. This triangle organizes the content of the module. So we can see the title is My Future Profession. On the left side of the triangle, we have the contents of the English language. Okay, so we can see what are we going to focus on from the English language. On the right side of the triangle, we see the components of CLIL, Content and Language Integrated Learning. So we see math, art, and social studies. What are we going to see here, right? And then on the bottom of the triangle, we see values. Those values also come from the Ministry of Education and also from the US Embassy. Together, they established different values that they wanted included in the modules, and those are present right here, so we can see what values we are going to see in this module. So if I go through the module, I can observe different things, different pages. Except now it's not moving. There we go. So as you can see, the first thing that's going to pop out at you of these modules is there's so much reading. And that was one of the comments that I heard from a lot of teachers at the beginning. There's so much reading. Why is there so much reading? Okay, now, after having listened to the presentation, I think you guys know that this reading is not reading. It's what? Input, right? It's input. Yeah, so this is not a reading per se. What it is input. It's contextualized language. It talks about personalities around the world. You can see the level of the language is at the level of the students, basically, and they have maybe a few new vocabulary words, which are in the text, highlighted in orange, and also in a vocabulary box with their definitions in English, okay? So we can see all of this here. Oral communication, also we see oral communication. We have some career advice here, right? We could see that here. These are just like listening sections or speaking sections. We have reading sections. We have writing sections. I'm not going to go through every single page in detail because of time. I have to finish up pretty soon. So we have different elements. But what I want to show you is something specifically relevant to this, which is to the presentation, which is grammar, for example. Okay, so here we see a grammar page. And you say, what? There's no grammar here. No, there is grammar here because we can see right here, the grammar is highlighted in blue. Here's a grammar note. But we're not teaching grammar explicitly now. We're teaching grammar implicitly through the text, right? So we can see in this text here, it says the grammar note is the gerund and the infinitive. Throughout this text, we can see uses of the gerund and the infinitive in English. Okay, so for example, we can see learning in a different environment, living in another country, being far away from home, right? And what the students have to do is observe the use of these forms in the text. Underline the gerund and circle the infinitive. Up until there, they're not processing meaning. They're just looking for the ing. Okay, ing done. Yeah, okay, but wait a minute. It says next, what do you observe about these forms and how they're used? Check your answer with your classmates, then with your teacher. The gerund is used and the infinitive is used. So once again, they get to observe. They say, okay, I'm seeing language here. I'm seeing how it works in context. What is the rule? and they get to come up with the rule, you see? Okay, so that's some input with gerund and infinitives where they come up with the rule through a process of induction. Here's some more readings. That's actually a reading. Writing, persuasive essay. I'd like to show you one more page before we stop looking at the modules, but you have assessments here. You have a lot of content, as you can see. A self-evaluation. We have 2 projects in each module for bachillerato. So this is almost like project-based learning. Those of you who know about projects, where they use the language that they've been learning in the module to create something meaningful, obviously. Okay, if we look at another section of oral communication, I hope I didn't pass it yet. I don't think so. Sorry, I'm going through these so quickly, but you're welcome to look at this on your own time. There's another section of oral communication, but I think that I already skipped it. Let's go back. Let's see. Yes, these books, here it is. These books look very different than all the previous books that they've had in the Ministry of Education, but now we can understand why. Okay, so here's a section in oral communication. Here's listening. We can see the grammar note right here, about the present perfect continuous. That's the target structure. So students listen to an audio, which I'm not going to play for you now, but they listen to an audio where they hear the present perfect continuous over and over, right? And they have to respond to it somehow. So here you can see it says, listen to a conversation between 2 university students. As you listen, decide who would say each of the following statements: Karen, Jeff, both, or neither. And so then they have to write the names here. So you can see college life has been treating, have been studying, haven't been letting me, have been studying, has been going by, have already been thinking. What do we see? Present perfect continuous, present perfect continuous, over and over again, but in a context. And they have to process the meaning, listen to the audio, process the meaning of the sentences they're reading, and determine who would say each one of those things. And since at this point, this is a review for Tercero de Bachillerato, in theory, it's a review, they can also do output, because in theory, they should already have this structure in their implicit system. So they can write some sentences about what's been happening in their lives specifically, right? So in this country are my classmates, they can ask questions to each other, things like that. Okay, so we can see how grammar is also taught in a communicative way through context. Just a small little grammar note here, just, as a parenthesis. But that's all they need, really. That's all students need. And they can start picking up the grammar through context. So to finish, this was the modules project. Please, I invite you to check them out, to download them, to use them in your classes. Anybody is welcome to use them, like I mentioned. To finish the presentation for today, I would like to share with you this. The bottom line. The bottom line. So after all of this, what is the point? What is the situation here? What has this hour been trying to say? Basically, we need to move from more traditional methods to more natural and communicative approaches now. Our aim as language teachers should be for our students to be able to use the language in real life in varying contexts, not simply fill in the blanks on an exam to pass. Give your students the greatest gifts you can: your time, your patience, your love, and input. Thank you very much.
I'm sure we all learned a lot. Now we have some questions from the audience. First, there's a question that I'm sure we all want to know. Giselle Quiroz asked, how did you learn all the languages you can speak? What strategies did you use?
Okay, that's a very interesting question. Thank you. Actually, I have a caveat. I don't speak Quechua fluently. I have studied it a little bit. I have taken a class in Quechua and I'm working on it and I want to learn more, but I don't speak it fluently yet. The other languages, yes. So I was taught in a certain way using certain methodologies, but what I did was look for extra experiences in the language. So for example, with Spanish, I remember back to when I was a teenager, and the first CD that my parents gave me in Spanish, that was Gloria Estefan, Mi Tierra. Oh my goodness. I played that CD nonstop, all the time. I think my parents thought we were in Cuba. It was one of my favorite things to listen to. And so I looked for extra opportunities. I watched TV in Spanish. In Chicago, we had 4 Spanish TV stations on regular TV. So I watched a lot of TV in Spanish. I did a lot of things in the language that really helped me to be able to, to be able to use the language. I of course lived in Spain. I found Spanish speaking friends. I became part of their group. So I think what really led me to be able to become fluent in Spanish or in French, for example, was the experiences that I had in real life with the languages that I speak. I had the base from classes, but that's not what gave me fluency in the language. It was being able to use it in real life.
Thank you, that's amazing. We have another question from Sol Calle. She says, if we know that traditional methods are not effective, why some teachers continue using them in schools, high schools, and even in some universities?
That's a very good question. Excellent question. Thank you for that question. I think it's super important that we all address this question. There could be a lot of reasons. One of the reasons is simply not knowing that there's a better way. It's simply not knowing that. Okay, now that's number one. Number two also could be change is very difficult in life in general. And I think if you're a teacher who's been teaching for 20, 30 years, you're used to teaching in a certain way, and to change your whole practice to a completely different way of teaching, I think some teachers are like, it's a lot of work. It is a lot of work. I'm not going to lie, it is. But it's worth it in the end. That could be another reason. Another reason is because we have a false sense of security in that, okay, if my students fill out these grammar exercises with all these verb conjugations and they get 9s and 10s, then the teacher incorrectly assumes that means the students know English, that they're good at English because they can fill out the blanks. Okay, then the test is, tell them to go speak to me or speak to my parents, for example, monolinguals in Chicago. Can they have a conversation? So we're equating success in English language learning with being able to fill in blanks on activities. And that's not the case, right? That's not what makes us successful language learners, is being able to fill in blanks. So there are a lot of reasons people think, no, they need the paradigms, they need this explicit grammar instruction, even though scientific studies in linguistics have shown they do not need them for acquisition. It's hard. I think we need to spread the word and make it kind of like a contagious effort, a domino effect, hopefully. Yeah.
Thank you. We have one question from Karina Cherres. She asks, how can we apply this input in a foreign-student classroom, where normally students switch to their mother tongue every time they can?
It's not easy, and that's something that's natural for students. I mean, that's absolutely natural, but we need to challenge them and we need to work together on this. Because if their teacher from the previous year allowed them to speak Spanish, allowed them to translate everything, worked with translation, translated everything for them into Spanish, then they got them used to that practice. And so they get to our class and they're like, nope, my teacher last year did all this for me. I'm not going to do this. So we really need to work together. To get students to not speak their first language is very difficult because, let's face it, comprehension is always greater than production. In other words, students can understand more than what they can produce. This is a given. This is how it is, even in our first language. We hear new vocabulary words, we wouldn't produce those words, but we can understand them, right? So that's natural. And sometimes students really want to express an idea and they don't have the tools in English to be able to do that yet. That happens. This is something that's very common, So I feel like encouraging them by setting an example and speaking to them in comprehensible English I think sets a good precedent, saying, guys, just listen and you will be surprised at how much you can understand. And you speak to them in a clear, simplified way. If you make them enthusiastic about it, they will start understanding. Getting them to stop speaking Spanish is nearly impossible, but setting a good example is a good start.
Thank you. Our next question is, do you believe teachers feel pressure to complete their curriculum programs, and that's the reason why they rush in teaching these grammar structures?
Yes, I completely agree with that. Unfortunately, the way that the programs in schools are established, a lot of times those are established not by linguists, but by people in general education or by politicians or people who don't know about language acquisition. So this is a big challenge because you have to comply with a certain number of target structures or with a certain number of pages in the book. Yes, this is very difficult. It's very difficult because we as teachers don't have much power over that. Dr. Krashen would say, change the system, which I think would be amazing if we could, but I don't know how feasible that is. So in the meantime, I think that what we can do is take the, fine, I have to teach the target structure of modal verbs, for example, in the next 2 weeks. Instead of me saying, here's a modal verb, here, this, I start with a whole bunch of input. I can still, in 2 weeks, work with much more input than output with the students. I can start with the first week of just input activities, seeing the modal verbs, hearing them in context, all of those things. I think that's what we have what power to do in our classrooms, but we don't have that power yet to change the scope and sequence of the curriculum.
Thank you. We conclude with this question from Karina Cherres. She asks, we should change how the system is configured. What will happen with the standardized tests, which are not only grammar-based, but have different techniques students have to follow?
These are really excellent questions. I think they're so pertinent. They're very important. Thank you for that question. Yes, this is a question that I've heard a lot. And it's interesting because I just read an article the other day that was criticizing Cambridge exams. And it's a really good article. I don't remember the exact title of it, but I'll see if I can find it for you. It's a really good article because it's not like a scientific article, it's more of like an opinion type article, but it brings up very good points related to language acquisition. A lot of times Cambridge exams are not very flexible. Like I could look at a Cambridge exam and say, well, I would say either one of these two options, for example, as a native speaker. But Cambridge says, no, but it's just this option. So it's kind of, yes, it's like a straitjacket. We're kind of bound by those exams, but a caveat. I know a student who is 17 years old right now. She moved from the United States to Ecuador when she was 14 years old. And at her school, they made her take a Cambridge exam. Native speaker of English, with also Spanish, native speaker of both languages, had gone to school in English through 14 years old, okay? Never learned about grammar forms or anything like that because it's a native language, right? Okay. They made her take the Cambridge exam when she was 15 years old, without studying for the exam at all, without preparing for the exam. At 15 years old, the student got a C1 level as a native speaker. What does that tell us? What does that tell us? That tells us that if you start acquiring language in a more natural way, if you're surrounded by the language and you receive meaningful input and everything, when you get to those exams, instead of trying to recall rules, try to apply rules and think about rules, you can just do what simply sounds right to you. So I think that says, even though it's only one case, I think that it says something for the idea of teaching in a more natural and communicative way. That the result is that you develop native-like, not native, but native-like intuitions in the language that allow you to complete those exams just by how you feel about the language. Yeah, I know this sounds right. I know this is what I would say. not through the explicit rules. So the explicit rules are not necessary to be successful on that exam. They're not necessary. You can be successful on that exam using native-like intuitions that will have been created through in real life situations, contextualized language, and comprehensible input.
I want to thank you again for your amazing presentation. I'm sure we all learned and enjoyed it a lot. I want to remind you that you can watch all the poster presentation on the YouTube page and also on the VEA platform. Thank you for attending this keynote speaker, and see you in the next presentation.
Thank you.